God truly is a God of miracles. And today we celebrate Purim, where oftentimes God is seemingly hidden from our view. We don't always see him so directly in an ostentatious miracle, but he's always working behind the scenes on our behalf. We are called by his name. We are righteous in his eyes because we have the righteousness of Christ in us. And the steps of the righteous are ordained by God. They're ordered by God. So last week when I came, our van had kind of blown up. The value went from here to here. We had a reversal of fortune. It went from a decent value to next to nothing. And kind of threw us for a loop a little bit, saying it's only 3 years old. And and at first, we went through all that stuff. It was like, how could this happen? And, that's not right, and blah, blah, blah. But, we got to talking, a little bit later on, and it's like, maybe this happened because God is preventing something else from happening to us. Just maybe, God is really looking out for us. And so what seems to be bad news for us, there's something greater that we're not seeing. And I think that that's a halakha or teaching behind this in my drash, or my personal take on this holiday, is that God is always with us. And we need to start looking for him. Rather than focusing on what we're seeing and what we're thinking, but he's always with us. He's always working on our behalf. So even in our worst of times, he's there with us. All times. So, in thinking about this, getting ready for Purim, which we'll talk about in some great length here, I'd like to read something from Psalm 37, 1 through 20. And this kind of speaks a lot to what we're going to be talking about today. Psalms 37, 1 through 24, it says, "Do not fret because of those who are evil, to be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and do not turn to wrath. Do not fret, it leads only to evil. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. A little while and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found. But the meek will inherit the earth and enjoy peace and prosperity. The wicked plot against the righteous and gnash their teeth at them, but the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming. The wicked draw the sword and bend the bow to bring down the poor and needy, to stay those whose ways are upright. But their swords will pierce their own hearts, and their bows will be broken. Better the little that the righteous have than the wealth of many wicked. For the power of the wicked will be broken, but the Lord upholds the righteous. The blameless spend their days under the Lord's care, and their inheritance will endure forever. In times of disaster, they will not wither. In days of famine, they will enjoy plenty. But the wicked will perish. Though the Lord's enemies are like the flowers of the field, they will be consumed. They will go up in smoke. Those the Lord blesses will inherit the land, but those who he curses will be destroyed. The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. Though he may stumble, he will not fall, for the Lord upholds him with his hand. Now, if that doesn't give you encouragement, I don't know what will. And And so we look at today being Purim. This is a day that, in the natural, it would have been a horrible day, and I wouldn't have been able to really tell you about it much because I wouldn't be here. I would have been, my ancestry would have been killed out long ago, and I wouldn't be able to talk to you about Purim. And instead, maybe the only thing that would survive would be the annihilation of the Jewish people. But, thanks be to God, He preserved the Jewish line. Thanks be to God that the nations can be grafted into that Jewish line, and that we are one family. So, today we celebrate Purim. And this is the eternal principle concerning the Jewish people. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. It's through these people that God preordained that Messiah would come. And we would have the inheritance of Messiah. Let's figure out here. Turn this on. So this is a painting here, a famous painting about Purim. Purim is the Feast of Lots. Lots you might think of as like a dice in a way, although they were like sticks, but they acted like a dice. And what they did is when the evil person in our story that we'll be looking at today, named Haman, was planning the annihilation of the Jewish people, he drew lots. And he drew lots to determine what month and what day, he was going to go out and kill everybody. The women, the children, the old, the young, just everybody that was Jewish. He hated the Greeks because the Greeks came against the Persians. He hated the Jews because he considered them an enemy because of his background. He was, the villain in our story, Haman, was known as Haman the Agagite because he was a descendant of King Agag of Amalek. And Amalek we know as a people known as the Amalekites. The Amalekites, if you remember, when the Jews were escaping Egypt, they were the first people that went way out of their way to bring harm to the children of Israel in the desert. They were very infamous for child sacrifice, and God hated them for that. And he asked King Saul to wipe out all of the Amalekites, even as far as their livestock. The women, the children, there would be no more Amalekites. And King Saul did his job halfway. He killed the very weak and the very easy targets of the Amalekites. He left the king to live. He left other people to live, and he left some of the livestock, the really good-looking livestock, to live, but things that looked more infirm, he killed them off. And so Samuel, receives a word from God about how God is so displeased with what King Saul did. And this is the beginning leading up to our story here. So we see the villain that survives as a descendant of King Agag. And that's why he's known as Haman the Agagite. And so, Vinny, can I have you pass out some of these noisemakers here? Would you mind? In that basket there. These noisemakers are called groggers, and we're going to be using them because as the Lord directed King Saul to wipe out every trace of the Amalekites, to blurt out their names. In this story that we'll be telling, every time I say the word Haman, you'll make some noise to blot out his name. That's a tradition. You know how big we are on tradition. So you're going to get one. I just got one in from Israel. Mike Robert and our spokesmodel is going to demonstrate that for you. There we go. And on there it says, when Adar comes, the season of joy comes. because of the vindication and the redemption that they were not wiped out. And so the lot is thrown, and the lot is called a pur. And so when you have more than one lot, then it's called Purim, because im is always the plural. So we celebrate Purim, but in Western culture we somehow call it Purim, but it's actually Purim. But anyway, in this particular painting that we're looking at, we see the heroine of the story, who is Hadassah, the Jewish heroine, who is renamed to hide her identity as a Jew to a Babylonian name, which is Esther. Esther is the derivative of the name Easter, and derivative of, more closely, Ishtar. Ishtar was the goddess for the Babylonians, the goddess of carnal love, incidentally. And so this hid her identity as a Jew. And so here we see the height of the story, the drama, the climax, you might say, as she comes before the king, unannounced, and that was a crime that could be punishable by death. I mean, we'll get into the story here. So anyway, that's what we're looking at here. So a lesser Jewish festival held in the spring is Purim, on the 14th or 15th day of Adar, to commemorate the defeat of Haman's plot to massacre the Jews, is recorded in the book of Esther. So we celebrate it on the 14th day of the month of Adar, which is the 12th month in the Jewish calendar year. And if you are living in a fortified or walled city, you celebrate that for 2 days. You celebrate for the 14th and 15th, because later in the story, Esther says that she wants something repeated. So out in all the provinces, and there were 127 of them, going all the way from India to the land of Cush, which was Ethiopia, 127 provinces, they had a battle then where the Jewish people got to defend themselves, and in the fortified city then, they had a 2-day battle. And that's why in some places it's celebrated 2 days, other times it's celebrated 1 day. Basically, sundown on Thursday to sundown on Fridays when we celebrated it. So it's pretty close right now. So the book of Esther is the only biblical book that does not include God's name. You might think, well, isn't that funny? I mean, here we're celebrating this religious holiday and they don't even mention God. But the intention of the book is that we should look for God, because he isn't always just right out there where we can see him, not always in a great, great way, but he's always with us. He's in everything we do. Well, we pray as the people did in that day. They were praying to God. As they trusted, they were trusting in God. God was moving on their behalf when they couldn't even see it, but their trust and their faith in him showed this hidden nature of God. And the silver instrument on the table there is the book of Esther that is usually read. If you want to open up that, Mary, and this is called Megillah. So the Megillah, if you open it up, you're going to see the Esther scroll in there. And it is always read on Purim. And you just kind of like a scroll, it just keeps moving the text then from right to left. And it looks very beautiful too. Yes, beautiful. And I got a good deal on it. Because I am Jewish, so...
Yeah, looking for the deal.
What would be if I didn't? Okay, so anyway, so this is the story of Esther that we're going to be looking at today. And this makes up the festival of Purim. So that's a look at what a Megillah would look like, and you see it all written in Hebrew. Now these are the characters in our story today of Purim. These are our main characters. On the left we have Mordecai the Jew. Mordecai was working for the king, and he was part of the Babylonian exile, living in Persia. Where's Persia at? Where do we find Persia today? It is going to be not Iraq, but Iran. Babylon is Iraq. And so, just so you have an understanding, and, you know, how does Iran feel about the Jewish people today? Not too good. I mean, they always are saying things like, we're going to kill you, we're going to destroy you, we're going to wipe you out, totally, you know, we're making a nuclear arsenal that's going to hit you. Things like that, you know, it raises tensions.
Raises tensions, yeah.
So, this is Mordecai. Now, Mordecai is raising his cousin. She calls him uncle, but it's really her cousin. And so, her parents were both killed, and so she, as a young girl, and they were killed most likely by the Amalekites. And so she's got a history behind her too. So she's in Persia, being taken care of, being raised by her cousin Mordecai. Her name is Hadassah, and Hadassah means myrtle, and she is renamed then Esther. And her identity is hidden because they don't want her to look like a Jew, because there was a lot of persecution for Jewish people then. And so then in the middle we see the villain of our story, and that is Haman the Agagite. And he's looking very, yes, thank you. That was Haman the Agagite. And he wants to get to the top. He wants to be the king of Persia, but there are people a little bit ahead of him, so he does a lot of maneuvering to gain favor, and then when he thinks he's got a sure way to the throne, that's when he kind of opens up and he says, you know, we need to get rid of these Jews here. What are they still doing in Persia? They're going to overthrow us, just like they did to the Persians back, or did they just the Amalekites back in the time of my ancestor, King Agag. And so he's the one that develops the plot to annihilate the Jewish people. And then on the right we see the king, and the king goes by different names. Depends on who's telling the story. He can go by Xerxes, or he can go by Verosh, I should say. And there are a couple other names too he goes by, but those are his two primary names. And he is the king of Persia, and there are plots to kill him. And Haman has his hand in those things, but he's always coming out on top. He always comes out smelling good, even though he's very corrupt. And then at the end of the list there, we have Vashti. Vashti was the queen. And we don't hear too much of her because they get rid of her at the beginning of the story. You see, when the story opens up, we find the Persians celebrating their greatness and their glory. There are 127 provinces, and they have the leaders and the nobility from all of these provinces down celebrating for festivities. Now, we're not talking about just a night or even a weekend. They were celebrating for like 120 days. Feasting and drinking every day. I can't even imagine that. I mean, that wouldn't even be fun anymore at all. But that's what they were doing. 120 days of it. Okay, now, after that 120 days, I guess they just didn't get enough, because then they thought, well, okay, we'll open the next 7 days up to the population. And they can come and feast and drink with us for 7 days. And everything was in excess. And then the women had their own feast, the queen's feast. So she was feasting and celebrating for 7 days also. So Vashti's over here celebrating with her contingent, and we see Ashkashverosh, the king, celebrating with all the people. Now, he had a lot to drink for 127 days. and his nobility said, why don't you bring out the queen? You know, show her off, because she's supposed to be the most beautiful woman in the whole kingdom. And they knew that she wouldn't come out, really, because, number one, she was very busy with her own feasts. I mean, It's like, really, you're going to call me away from mine to come and celebrate yours? I'm busy here. And then the second reason that people think that she wouldn't come out is because she was against the war that Ashverosh wanted to go against the Greeks with, because his father was beaten in battle by the Greeks. And you know the history of the Persians against the Greeks. A very interesting history there, a lot of warfare. And so because they lost, he wanted to avenge his father's loss, and so he wanted to go into battle. Vashti was dead set against him going into battle against the Greeks. And so that was twisted around, that she was kind of working on the other side of the Greeks, against her own king. And so these things came into play, and she didn't come at his beck and call to his feast. And so the nobility said, wait a minute, she's not obeying you? This is a chauvinistic society. What would happen if other women stopped obeying their husbands too? This could be a panacea. What would come of this? And yet she disobeys you, she's dissing the king? We can't have this. And so he asked his advisors, his viziers, what to do, and they advised him that he needs to get rid of the queen. So the queen it doesn't really spell it out that she was killed, but if she wasn't killed, she was exiled. Okay? So she was not in the picture anymore. So the people needed a new queen. And so where are they going to find this new queen? Well, they had a lot of candidates in 127 provinces. So the officials in all the provinces were told to round up the beautiful virgins and to bring them to Susa, also known as Shushan. That was the capital of the Persian Empire at the time. So all of these young virgins came against their will, and one of them then would be chosen to be the queen. They also rounded up some men also, and they were turned into eunuchs, against their will, of course. And, you said ow? And so they were eunuchs that were to be in service then of these maidens that were preparing to meet the king. Now, the preparation process for meeting the king was a lengthy process. They were bathing 6 months in myrtle. And then they were anointed for another 6 months with all kinds of oils and scents. So a whole year of preparation. I think it takes me too long when it takes me like 10 minutes to find the clothes I'm going to wear and get them ironed and run up to school sometimes. But this was a long time, a whole year they had to prepare. A lot of preparation. After the preparation then, they were told that one night each they would get to meet the king. And they got to go into his treasure room and pick out whatever they wanted. Jewels or jewelry, diadems, whatever they wanted to wear, fancy clothes, anything they wanted, so they could present themselves worthy and desirable to the king. So Esther's time comes up then to meet the king, and she finds favor with him. It's said in the writings that, we don't find this really in the Bible, but in other writings we find that she chose to dress very plainly. And she didn't pick all the jewelry and all this great gold and, all the flashy stuff. And she stood out because of her humility. And he was kind of taken aback. It's like, oh, you don't think enough of me to dress up, you're meeting the king. But she stood out because she was so different. She didn't look greedy and like a gold digger, like so many of them who were desperate to be chosen as the queen. So he ends up being very interested in Esther, and it's a waiting game now, because only those people that he wanted to come back, to invite back, could ever come back to him. Nobody could just barge in on the king. And so he calls Esther back. They do fall in love, and he ends up making Esther his queen. Now, all is not roses. About 4 years go by, and Haman And all those evil people in the kingdom are plotting against the king. There are two officials that devise a plot to kill the king. Some say it was by poisoning, because they were cupbearers at one point for the king. And Mordecai is at the king's gate, and he overhears this plot to kill the king. So it's like, I got to get news to Esther. She's got to, inform the king so he's safe. And so he does. They tell the plot is divulged to Esther, and then she shares it with the appropriate people, and it's written in the official annals, the scrolls that are kept of all the happenings of the day. And it credits Mordecai as being the person that supplied the information that would end up saving the king's life. The two officials are killed, and Haman is working again, kind of behind the scenes, kind of stirring everybody up. Haman has found favor with the king, and he's promoted. He's promoted to the head vizier, the head advisor to the king. And so now he's really full of himself. He rides through the town, and everybody has to bow when they see him coming. But who doesn't bow? The Jews don't bow because they only bow to God. And so Mordecai is the most ostentatious one of the Jews that really sticks out and really is very vocal about not bowing to Haman when he walks by. So this really galled him, okay? And so he thought to himself, well, gee, I'm not going to just kill Haman. I'm not going to just kill Mordecai. I'm going to just kill all of the Jews, okay? And so he presents it to the king. He says, look, they are danger to the state. He says, look what happened in our history when they killed off the Amalekites. Look at what they did then. They're going to do it again. They're only staying here because they're going to, be bringing damage to the kingdom. Get rid of them. Get rid of all of them. So King, I will even pay you 10,000 talents to enact a program to get rid of all of these Jews out of the kingdom. The lot is cast. The king says, okay, we'll do that. He takes a signet ring, seals the deal. It's now an official decree. Once it becomes an official decree, it cannot be undone according to their law. So things are looking pretty bad. And the 12th month of the year, Adar, the 13th day, is the day that is posted in every province that the Jews can read that they're going to be annihilated. And I always think, can you imagine knowing the day in the future, like 11 months away, that you're going to be killed? I mean, how do you live? I mean, how do you function? It's like, oh my gosh, another month, and then we're going to be exterminated next month. We got 3 more weeks to extermination. Let's go out and do our grocery shopping now. And, we better catch that theater program because, in 2 more weeks now we're going to be killed. I mean, it's just unfathomable. Unfathomable. And so, Esther is told about this plot to kill the Jews. And the king still doesn't know that she is Jewish. And so Esther then she has a message sent through her eunuch that was taking good care of her. They were very close to communicate with Mordecai. And Mordecai is in sackcloth and ashes. And so he cannot even come in through the king's gate anymore because he's not properly dressed. She sends him clothes so he can come in, but he won't. I mean, it's understandable how he was very saddened, which is the understatement of the year. So he says, look, Esther, he says, you're the queen. He says, you need to go to the king, and you need to ask him to save the Jewish people. It comes down to you, Esther. She says, I can't, because if I go before the king without his invitation, it's death. It's sure death for me. And then he responds, if you don't do it, if you are silent, somebody else will, you and your family won't be exempt from this either. You're going to be killed, and God's will be performed by somebody else. Because he's already given us the assurance that we are going to survive. But it's going to happen through the work of God's people. Somebody somewhere else will do this. So we're entrusting it to you and hope that you do this. And so she's faced with an unfathomable question too, thinking, I'm a woman, number one, in a very extremely chauvinistic country where the death penalty is for acts of disobedience. She has to go before the court. She swings open the door after 3 days of prayer and fasting. And even her maidservants were praying and fasting too at this time. She swings the door open and approaches the king, and that looked like, am I dead? And remarkably, the king extends his golden scepter to her, and she touches the golden scepter, which said that it will be okay. You won't die. Thanks be to God. And he says, what is your request? Up to half of my kingdom, Esther, what is your request? She says, I want to have a banquet for you, and I also want Haman to come to the banquet. And I'm thinking of that Ricky Nelson song, about coming to the garden party and, to reminisce with your old friends, and it wasn't like that. This was not a light thing. You just don't invite, the king and the top vizier to a banquet. So what's this all about? So they go to the banquet the next day, and the king is curious. He's like, Esther, what is your request? Great food, great wine as always, but what do you want? And Haman is thinking, well, I am invited too, so I am really something special. And so she says, well, come back tomorrow night, and I'll tell you then what my request is. So Haman, feeling really good about himself, thinks, okay, I've got the cat in the bag on this one. He goes home and tells his wife how great everything's looking for him, and how he's just, getting one step closer to becoming maybe king someday. He's getting all the favor now. He's given the king's signet ring. He's given this huge mansion in Persia, only second to the king's palace himself. And so he goes to talk to his wife, and his wife says, look, now's the time to make your move. Go build a 50 cubit high hangman's platform where you can kill Mordecai, who dissed you and would not bow to you. Now that you have the favor of the king, nothing can stop you. Go on, Haman, go ahead and build it. So he built this 50 cubit high gallows in his front yard, so he can gleefully watch Mordecai the Jew hang, so he can have the last laugh. Well, in the meantime, that night, the king was having a rough night. He just couldn't sleep. Just tossing and turning, thinking about everything. And he was thinking, gee, maybe I'm going to look at some of those annals, just do some reading, some night reading here. Like some of us do sometimes when we can't get to sleep. And God leads him to the annal that has Mordecai's account of saving his life from these two officials that were seeking to kill the king. And he thinks to himself, oh my gosh, somehow I never got to even celebrating this Mordecai. So, at the time he's looking at this, Haman is hanging around. And the king says to him, Haman, what would you do to celebrate somebody that has done such great things for the king, somebody that you really want to honor. And Haman's thinking, no, he's talking about me. But he wasn't talking about me. He was talking about Mordecai, but he didn't know that. So he said, well, I would get the king's horse, and then I would dress him in the king's robes, and then I'd parade him through the streets, and I'd put a crown on his head. And then I'd declare how this man has found the king's favor, and we honor him. I'd shout that through the streets. So the king thought about it and says, great idea, Haman. So go ahead and get the horse ready and the clothes ready and the crown ready, because you're going to be taking Mordecai through the streets. What? Reversal of fortune here. And so he takes him through the streets, totally humiliated. I mean, he even wears like a hood over his face to hide his identity. He's so ashamed, you know. Here he's been stirring up all kinds of trouble to get, the Jews annihilated and getting everybody to hate the Jewish people. And now he's leading him through the streets to honor him. What a reversal. And so, he goes then that night. He's sent for because the queen's second banquet comes up. And at that banquet, he thinks, well, the king is still going to honor him, but maybe he has to lay low a little bit. But, he's got the favor, so he's got it in the bag again. So the king asks Esther, he says, well, what can I do for you? What is your request? He's been waiting a long time now. 2 different visits, and now you better tell me what it is right now. Up to half the kingdom I'm going to give you, Esther. And so she says, I plead for my life and the life of my people. And he's like, what do you mean, your life and your people? Who are your people? And then she tells him that she's a Jew. She was part of the exile. And it's like, he never knew that. And then he says, who is this man that is out to kill you? And she said, it's the evil Haman. Evil Haman. Furious at this, he storms out of the room. And while he's out of the room, Haman goes over and kneels before her on her couch where she's lying, and he's begging for his life. Another great reversal here. And he's falling down in front of her, and the king comes in and he says, if it wasn't bad enough what you did, now you're going to molest my queen? He calls in the guards, they take him out, and it's like, hang him on those gallows that he set up for Mordecai. Yeah. Nice reversal there. So, after this Haman is hung, and then the queen says, but this decree is still out there. On the 12th month of Adar, the Jews throughout 127 provinces are going to be exterminated. And he can't go back on it because it was the law of the Medes and Persians. You can't go back on something once it's an official edict. So he said, what we'll do is we'll talk to the officials in every one of those regions and ask them to aid the Jews as they are now allowed to protect themselves, to arm themselves, and to go into battle. And when these different officials saw the favor that Mordecai had now, because the king took off Haman's signet ring and placed it on Mordecai's hand, and he now gave him his mansion. We gave him actually the mansion to Esther, and Esther and Mordecai shared then this mansion, although she basically lived with the king, even though it was hers. And so he got everything that Haman had. So part of the deal then is that all the sons of Haman would be killed off. He had 10 sons also. And so there's no more trace of Haman anywhere. His progeny. So the battle goes on, for anybody that wants to challenge the Jews in Susa, which is also Shushan, the capital of Persia, and it's also going on throughout the 127 provinces. 75,000 people died as a result of that conflict in the 127 provinces. And in Susa, you had 500 that died. Now, the king comes back to Esther and says, well, what can we do now? What can I do? What else would you like me to request? She says, well, I want the same thing to happen in Susa that happened today. I want it to happen tomorrow. And I want the sons of Haman, the 10 sons of Haman, to be hung. Well, how can you kill somebody that's already been hung the day before? I mean, and this is where prophecy comes in. This is encrypted into the story of Esther. Actually, in the Hebrew text, there are 2 columns that are almost arranged like a hangman's gallows. And it lists each one of the names of each one of those 10 sons. And then the column next door to it lists the names of the 10 sons. And in lowercase letters, there are 3 Hebrew letters that spell out the year, which is equivalent, because every letter in Hebrew equates to a numeric value and to an actual literary value, what it means. And so the number comes up to 1946. What do we see happening? 1946. We see the Nazis in power in Germany. We see a man named Julius Streicher, who is the editor of Der Stürmer magazine, which was an anti-Semitic magazine. And right after Kristallnacht, which was the breaking of glass, the breaking of businesses, the burning of synagogues in Austria as a demonstration by Hitler, he came out and said that the Jews once did this before to 75,000 Persians. They're waiting to do it to us. And so he's getting everybody to start hating all the Jews in Deutschland and throughout the world, but specifically Europe. And so, after the war, Goering is imprisoned at Nuremberg for trial. And also, we see 12 other men that were Nazis that were accused of these war crimes. Now, 10 of them were given a death sentence. And that death sentence would be by the gallows. There was a Nazi sympathizer that gives some cyanide to Goering in prison, and he dies. So he can avoid being hung. And the other 10 that were convicted of death would be hung. When Julius Streicher goes up to be hung, he starts out by yelling, "Heil Hitler! Heil Hitler!" to everybody. And as he approaches his actual death here at the gallows, then he starts getting nervous, and they're dragging him there, and they turn him to face his accusers, and he looks at them and he yells, "Purim Fest 1946. Now, another remarkable thing about this is they were really supposed to be executed in 1945. But because they wanted amnesty for their crimes, it extended the trial 1 year. And so it fulfilled prophecy by having that. You know, what God sets up in the book, it's going to happen. We are living in prophetic times too. There are things that we are experiencing right now that are prophetic. For such a time as this, just like for Esther, such a time as this for her, you know, those things will come to pass. And we can be part of God's plan, or we can be assimilating with evil. It comes down to making a choice. Whom will you serve this day?
The Lord.
Good answer. Good answer. You passed. You get an A.
I got
for Susie.
I got A for today.
Excellent. Excellent. Let's take a look at these. So here's some incredible things, that were said. This is what Mordecai says to Esther. If you will remain silent at this time, relief and salvation will come to the Jews from another source. And you and the house of your father will be lost, because you're Jewish too. And who knows if it is not for just such a time as this that you reach this royal position. Every one of us is given a mission. Every one of us has a very specific purpose that we were created for. Just like Esther had, just like Mordecai had. We make our choices, and we can either fulfill God's purposes for us, or we can avoid that and say, well, let somebody else do that. I know, God, you're calling me to do this, you're giving me this opportunity, but it's just not convenient for me right now. I'd rather go do something else. Let somebody else take care of it. We all have those choices. But God has created each one of you for something very specific. Yes. Every one of you has a very unique purpose in life, as I do. Amen. And fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both the soul and body in hell. We find that as a correlation in Matthew 10:28. Then Esther bade them to return Mordecai this answer: Go gather all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidservants will fast likewise, and will go unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. And sometimes it comes down to that. But we know that regardless of what happens in life to us, this life is short. We can live forever with God. And then Esther goes before the king, and that's the golden scepter that says, you're exonerated, I will not kill you. And that the Father giveth me, that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. We find that correlation in John 6:37. And here we see in Hebrew, we see Esther before begging for her people, begging for her life at the banquet. And here we see a picture in a Hebrew text of the Megillah of Esther, and here we see Haman hanging from his own gallows. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done now? The rest of the king's provinces. Now what is thy petition? And it shall be granted to thee. Or what is thy request further? And it shall be done. Then Esther said, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow, prophetically, also according to this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And so here we see Göring on the left, we see Schleicher on the right, and that's the story I told you. The date of the Hebrew calendar is 5707. And that the equivalence of that is October 16th, 1946. And incidentally, that takes place at Hoshana Rabbah, which is during Sukkot. That's when the seal of God's justice is believed to be in the Hebrew faith. Coincidence? I'm sure it must be. Purim Fest 1946. Prophecy fulfilled. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelled in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of great gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions to one another. So that's why Jewish people give gifts. It's you might say it's like the Jewish Christmas in that regard, because it's part of their celebration, the gift giving. Oftentimes they'll put them in a basket. It's called a Purim basket, and you'll give it to your friends when you go and celebrate with them. Great celebration. The wearing of costumes comes about because of the idea of the hidden nature of everything. Everything is just under the surface, so everything is hidden. Esther's identity, so many things are hidden. It's hidden the agenda of Haman, the turning of the king against Haman. That's all hidden. Everything is a very hidden thing. So we see people telling the story of Esther through Purim plays, and also it's really gotten out of hand, where it's turned into almost like a Halloween with all the costumes and everything in Israel, or like a Mardi Gras. They really get carried away with it today, but it's all costumes. Even in Venice too, you have all the costumes and everything and all the masking. And I'm glad to see you guys were already prepared for Purim today. I see you all have your masks on, and so you're really up with it. I appreciate you doing that. Thank you. And so if we look at the top left, we see oftentimes there are children's plays doing the Purim story. And then on the bottom left, you guys all got some Hamantaschen, and there's some more up here if you'd like. The Hamantaschen represents Haman's hats, or Haman's hat. So that's why we see that three-cornered cookie filled with usually a fruit filling, or poppy seed perhaps. And then we see the reading of the Esther Megillah on the top middle. We see the Purim baskets that are given as gifts during Purim. And then we see just the mass celebrations publicly, and then all the home celebrations that are done on the right side there.
Okay.
Das ist alles. It's done now. Thank you for listening. Thank you for attention. Happy Purim.
Pray a blessing.
Yes. Are we going to sing the blessing, or just... Okay. So, Heavenly Father, we thank you that we are people of the promise. We thank you that we are alive to tell the story. We thank you that your word is true, and what you say will come to pass. Amen. Father God, we choose to be your people. We choose to do your will. Help us to always find the purposes for our lives, and help us to fulfill the will that you've created us for. Thank you that we walk in health and healing and the fullness of life. Thank you for your shalom. In Yeshua, our Messiah's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.